What are the symptoms of the good investor? How would you know?
If I stop being paranoid, I'm doing a bad thing.
How much asshole can a founder be in order to work with you?
We do need to open up very difficult conversations. Where's the IP sitting, whether that's part of the faculty, government, or that belongs to the actual person who developed it. Europe generally has that problem. I mean, if you think about how Stanford started, pretty much we're very flexible and liberal in it, and you see the value that they built.
Our next guest is Pedja Predin, a general partner at Fifth Quarter Ventures, a new early-stage venture capital fund creating global success stories from Southeast Europe. Pedja has over 12 years of experience in venture capital, corporate strategy, business development, and global expansion. And before establishing his own fund, he was a venture capital investor at South Central Ventures and served as the business manager at Microsoft Central and Eastern Europe. Additionally, Pedja is an active participant in the startup and the blockchain community in Serbia and Southeast Europe, providing mentorship, coaching, and angel investment.
And when that happens, that's going to happen sooner or later. But then I should retire and leave the spot for someone younger with more energy.
And if you're just as passionate about innovation as we are, hit subscribe for the Recursive podcast on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. We're everywhere.
Pedja, I'm very happy that we finally meet in person. I remember when we started the Recursive, one of our first interviews were was with you.
Yeah, I think it was about 3 years ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly.
Congrats.
You had a long journey so far, and you've been through different experiences in your career. How did you decide to enter the world of venture capital? When was that? And what inspired you to launch your own fund?
I think it's a long story. I think that for me, kind of like if we try to go back, the experience at Gelato was probably the most formative. So I joined the company in 2016. Gelato is a print on demand. At the time, it was a startup. And then we had an amazing journey to become a unicorn. And going through all of it, my role was actually more focused on emerging markets. I saw kind of like how scaling happens and was able to get the experience of being in China, being in India and Russia as some of the great markets where we saw unicorn success stories. And my thinking was kind of like how we can replicate it in the region. So my journey of being abroad was about 13, 14 years. I decided to come back home, and my passion was kind of like how we can help the ecosystem go to the next level. So that's how I pretty much ended up working with some startups, met South Central Ventures team, and joined them in 2019 as investment manager. And then after 2 years of being there, I decided to branch out on my own with Tihomir Bajic, who is my partner now. He was also a venture scout for South Central. We had the mutual ambition and mission on how to set up the fund and work together with the founders. And we took a risk. And from this perspective, it's still early to say whether we were successful, but we're doing our best and we are enjoying the journey.
I think this is the specific thing about venture capital, that it's only, after a certain amount of years where you understand if you have made the right bets or not.
Yeah, I think at the beginning you always first get kind of like the companies that have problems, and you try to survive day in, day out. But it's an adrenaline rush. I maybe have a bit of ADHD, so I enjoy doing multiple things. And there is nothing more satisfying in my mind than being with super successful people, trying to help them out, and they are doing really big things.
I wonder if you can relate your experience now founding your own fund with being a founder of a startup. Do you see similarities, and how is it different?
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of like on this energy level and adrenaline, it's very similar. I think that we as a fund probably have kind of like a longer time frame, and maybe I mean, from the founder's perspective, we are the ones that kind of like has less risk. I'm not sure I would agree on that. I think that in terms of the pressure, it's relatively similar. I think there are kind of like nuances where it's different. But the only way is kind of like that we better understand how they breed and they understand how we breed, so we can work together. Because if those expectations are not managed, we're not going to survive together. And I almost look at that relationship with the founders as a marriage. I'm happily married personally, but on the professional side, we do need to be together for 5 to 7 years. So it really needs to work both ways.
Indeed. Now, what is also, I think, special about venture capital, especially establishing your own fund, is that you need to master the art of differentiation and branding, because basically what you're offering is commodity. It's money.
True.
Yeah.
True. Capital is the first thing. Yes.
Exactly. So, what is the unique value proposition of your fund?
Yeah, I think that there are a couple of elements that Ticho and I worked a lot in the past few years to really develop this thesis on our value proposition. I think the key component is the playbook on how to scale, especially from the seed phase to the Series A. So we see our role not only as a capital provider, but really almost as an additional set of hands. So we try to roll up the sleeves and be supportive. And it's not really kind of like trying to tell founders, you should do this, you should do that. That's not going to work. But what we think is kind of like the best way is to be in the seat together with them and help them on the go-to-market, really help them on the fundraise and recruitment. So we see these 3 areas as key components, and we developed a playbook on how we can work. The additional element, which is important to say, is that we have a dual residency setup of the fund. What that means, I'm here on the ground, so I'm splitting my time between Zagreb and Belgrade, while our official office is in Belgrade, while Ticho is actually in Toronto and also traveling a lot to San Francisco and New York. So we really want to focus on the founders and the startups that are from here and want to go to North America. And we want to be the ones that are opening up the doors for them there. So we see that really as our differentiation. The third element, which is important, is that what we try to focus on is more technical founders. Due to, I would say, historical and economical reasons, founders here that we see as most successful are really the technical ones. We see that they really lack business acumen, but the second potential problem is that they don't have the self-awareness of that. So we really try to focus on working with them early on identifying the right customer profile, so ideal customer profile, on go-to-market strategy and distribution. So this is something that we think that a lot of the founders, not just in Serbia and Croatia, but I would say broader than that, really lack. And we see our mission to try to help them out.
To a great extent, I can subscribe to this statement because I think being in the business of storytelling and communication, it is usually how we see our contribution to the ecosystem. Great founders who not necessarily know how to sell themselves, how to position themselves, how to pitch also often. In any case, I wonder if you're focusing on founders who are targeting the US market and who are probably also going to fundraise there, would you agree that they need to be on the ground, they need to move to the States in order to make it?
I think that it's a good question, and I think that the answer cannot be generalistic yes or no. However, I personally do think that they need to spend at least 3-4 months every year there in the next 4 to 5 years. We see those as major markets, maybe not in all cases, but very often if you do have enterprise customer in San Francisco, you need to be there physically to close the deal and spend some time with them to onboard them properly, ensure that it goes smoothly. So although the rise of remote work really allowed startups, and now is better time than ever to do that from here, you do need to be there physically, at least for a while. So I think that's a sacrifice that we would definitely advise our founders to do, but not generally kind of like to move there for a long run. Another element which is, I think, important to mention is that we are big believers in the circular migration. My background is the same, so I did spend a big part of my life abroad, and decide to come back. We think that this type of migration is much more common than in the past. And even though someone left Serbia, Croatia, Bulgaria, went to Oxford, went to Harvard, it doesn't mean that they're going to stay there forever. And we need to develop those ties. So we really believe in the power of diaspora and kind of like connecting our people that are there with what's happening here.
I find this interesting because many of our team members are exactly like this. So they have spent some time abroad, and then at some point they come back, and we relate to each other because of that in a different way. It's something that changes in your mindset, and at the same time you have also this strong calling, to contribute, to make a shift, an economic shift, a mindset shift for your ecosystem, for your country. I wouldn't necessarily call it patriotism. I don't like this word anymore. It's unfortunately connotated by different groups of people, but that's what is actually bringing us together at the Recursive.
Yeah.
Now, probably we'll see also more and more people in the future who are not going to have just one place which they are going to call like the center of their life. Yeah. I think we can be much more mobile today, and we can have like two places. At least this is how I felt the happiest when I had like a base in Sofia, and I had a base in Vienna where I used to live before, and I was just, traveling back and forth. It is interesting.
It's my story between Belgrade and Zagreb, right? I mean, I'm spending time here. My family is here while the office is in Belgrade, so we shift places. But I think what you mentioned, I would fully agree, and this is what we like to see, kind of like someone who really understands and has these local roots, so really can operate in the local environment, but at the same time, she or he is ready to play on the global scale and is able to put herself or himself into the shoes of customers who can be in London, Dubai, Shanghai, New York, wherever.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the magic power, the sweet spot that we like to see. And it's not always easy to get, of course.
You mentioned when we started the interview that you're after a mission to bring back, or to not to bring back, but to bring the region on the next level. How does the next level look like, and what do you think we are missing as of today?
Yeah. So I think that kind of like going back to the mission of the fund and the name of the fund, I can maybe kind of like use this time to explain why the name Fifth Quarter. So my background, I'm a former athlete. I used to play water polo, which is really a small sport. But for me, it was really, as a kid, experience that really developed me to who I am today. And I think that if you look at it, at the moment, the best ambassadors of our region are the athletes. So whether that's Luka Modric or Nikola Jokic in basketball or Novak Djokovic in tennis, they are the faces, and people know what Croatia is, what Serbia is, based on their successes.
True.
What we want to accomplish is to have the mindset that these people have as a mindset of entrepreneurs, so the founders that we work with. So someone who's going to go to the extra mile, who's going to pretty much try to be a global winner. So we see, and it's sometimes stupid to put the numbers, but we try to kind of like correlate. So winning an Olympic medal is an amazing success in sports. We think that building a unicorn can relate to that. So not someone who is ready to sell at the first opportunity, and I'm not blaming anyone, that's of course perfect decision, but someone who's gonna do kind of like go against the wall. I mean, even looking at Novak Djokovic, he won I don't know how many Grand Slam titles, and he still wants to do more. So that's what we want to see as founders. And once we have kind of like more success stories, this next element that you ask me is the flywheel effect. So we want to see is a couple of big unicorns, early employees also being compensated through, I don't know, ESOP or some other instrument. And then these people building their own new success stories. So whether that's people that came from Infobip or Remats or similar stories, we want to see kind of like this next level of companies. We are if you think about it, early capitalism here, I mean, before the 90s, even in Bulgaria, there was no private enterprises. So it's kind of like early innings, I would say, and we have a huge opportunity of what can be accomplished. And one of the advantages of our past is actually this strong STEM education. So good engineering, good mathematics, good science. So we need to leverage that because I think that's one of our core advantages as a region, and really build that business muscle. And then I think the success stories will come.
Mm-hmm. So in a sense, Fifth Quarter Ventures will be their coach?
Yes, I like to think about kind of like as a coach, or we like to think that it's a Formula One analogy. So they're the drivers, and they come to the pit stop, and we try to help them kind of like change the tires and put the extra gasoline and tell them, you're doing a great job, and you should maybe kind of like think about this and that, and put the gas pedal.
Mm-hmm. I had this recently in another conversation with a VC where I asked him, to what extent do you believe that founders need to be coachable? Do they need to be coachable at all? And if they are, how much? In a conversation with others, it's hard for me to define where is the golden ratio, because the VC is going to expect you to be the captain of your ship or the driver of your race car. And at the same time, because for many this is like a first time experience, they might not have the, as you mentioned, the business acumen, the knowledge, the skills that they need, to make this journey.
Yeah, I think that we need to be very clear. The ultimate decision and responsibility is on the founders. So we as an investor, we sometimes do have a board seats, and we do have some specific terms that we like to have, kind of like special powers. But at the end of the day, we cannot really control the ship. We do need to open up very difficult conversations. And it's our mission and our fiduciary duty to our investors that we are fully transparent and we don't hide things. So anytime we see a problem, we need to communicate, we need to speak with the founder. It's their decision what can be done, but we prefer to work with the ones that are able to say, yes, it's my mistake, this is what I learned, and this is what I'm gonna do. And at the end of the day, we do like the ones that take the responsibility. So they don't need to always agree with us. We are not experts. There are a couple of things that we think that we know well, but for a lot of other things, they cannot just delegate the responsibility. So yes, we do want to have conversation, but sometimes the one that is the most coachable is not going to be the most successful one.
That's exactly the other extreme. But you mentioned something which is very critical. At least over the years, it became very important to me. I prefer to work with people who are able to say it was my mistake. And I saw this as a critical component of working together, because being able to say that for me shows a lot of confidence. Accepting that you're going to make mistakes because you are a human being after all. We're prone to do that every day, and it can happen anytime. This is what human is also about. But being able to admit it shows that you believe in yourself, and a single mistake doesn't define you. Yeah, and I think for us, especially in the Balkans, this trait is very, very difficult. We're very defensive.
We are defensive.
When I moved back at first, I was talking to people, and I have also other friends who have spent time abroad, and they start working with, Bulgarians, Serbians, and they're always shocked, like, oh my God, as soon as you give like a negative feedback, everyone is so defensive. Why do you think this is that? And how do you approach this? How do you deal with that?
I think it's very historical and social, and I think that, it's kind of like a product of our environment. And I think that for me, the easiest way to define is, if you think that you're not making any mistakes, you're playing the wrong sport. So you really not see the forest behind the tree where you're looking. And I think you're probably, dealing with the smallest challenge that you can. So I think that for me, that's a huge red flag. But I think that probably going back to what we discussed earlier, people like you and I and similar people that spend some time abroad probably have that cultural maturity to be able to take that responsibility. And I don't want to sound elitist, but it's very difficult to work with someone who hasn't spent at least some part of their career or worked with the global companies in order to be successful as a founder that we are seeking to work with.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting because huge part of your work is probably being a good judge of character, especially in the early stages. I think at a later stage of the company, there's so many KPIs and metrics that you can look at, and
it's more being financial investor in that later stages.
Exactly, but in the beginning, the one thing that you can rely on is the team, because anything else is or could change over time, and it should be also agile and adaptive to change depending on the market and then so on and the insights. So how do you achieve this level of maturity as an investor?
Yeah. Well, we'll see kind of like this level of maturity that we are seeking, whether we achieve that. But my first job out of college was actually in executive recruitment. So I was a headhunter for a Swiss company called Zender, which is one of the leading in the industry. And that was probably kind of like, from this perspective, one of the crucial experiences I had even before Gelato. So really trying to figure out cultural fit of people and trustworthiness and ability for them to take this extra mile that we spoke about. So that's one of the key elements of our diligence process, to understand that. But related to that, I am typically a big fan of having 2 or 3 co-founders. If there is a single founder, it's very difficult. It's a lot of pressure, and I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's much more difficult to do, especially as a first-time founder. If you're a serial entrepreneur, maybe it gets easier with time, but we prefer that 2 to 3 number. If there is 4 plus, I think there are too many of those. The decision making and the governance are difficult. And then also not just kind of like this people and chemistry component between them, but also we think that the hygiene is really on the legal side, which is not expensive. It takes a bit of time, but really they need to set up kind of like this shareholders agreement and relationship with the founders on the right way. The cap table needs to be clean, kind of like 50-50 split as equity. I'm not the biggest fan of. I think that's just shortcut and trying to avoid the problem. But we want them to have these difficult discussions prior to speaking with us, because problems are going to arise sooner or later. And if they're aware of them, it's easier to fix them early on than later.
Actually, it turns out from statistics that disagreements in the founding team are the most common reason why startups fail. It's not about the market, it's not about the product, it's not about all these things, but actually people not agreeing, because as soon as it gets hard, or maybe it gets super successful, then these hard conversations actually start. What about the chemistry between you as investment partner or partners in the fund and the founders themselves? This is something that VCs don't really talk about, but from what I hear, it is a factor. So if
it is,
I don't know, that some of them would have like a no asshole policy and so on and so forth. So how much how much asshole can a founder be in order to work with you?
Well, we are not the easiest to deal with, and I'm first to admit that, and I think that's normal. But typically the way we work is kind of like one person from our team would be kind of like the contact partner or whatever you say. And if this person doesn't have a good chemistry, it's not going to work. And we try to test it out early on. And then as part of the diligence process, multiple people are involved. And then we try to see kind of like, if anyone can work with them, who would that be and how can that work? And of course, we think that the first 100 days are the crucial. And that's kind of like the time where we can actually state, what we think should be the key elements that should be fixed, improved, or changed. So yeah, we try to do our best. It's not always roses.
Yeah.
But we are real believers in this kind of like direct, radical candor and important conversations early on. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Are there industries that you're especially passionate about?
So there are a couple, I mean, of course, we are generalists, given that we have the regional focus. There are a couple of industries where we saw more success stories, and also where we, as partners, have more experience. Okay. So for those, kind of like, it's more natural for us to spend more time. But of course, the goal is really to find the best founders that have that mentality that we spoke about. Yeah. So if you think about it, our region had good success stories in gaming, Web3. I'm particularly interested, of course, in everything around AI, especially kind of this infrastructure stack around the LLMs. We also like dev tools, so that's interesting space. So these kind of like multiple verticals, health and climate, which are important for the environment, of course.
Of course. You are also always a big part of the blockchain community here in our region. You mentioned Web3 before that. I wonder what is currently happening there. I mean, we saw a sort of a revival after the big crash. Is it something that you're still passionate about, or what do you observe?
So I think that kind of like on a philosophical level, the blockchain should be the trust layer. Okay. So as a technology, it's important to look at it from that perspective. And then also there are multiple use cases of blockchain, and crypto was the biggest one. And at the end of the day, that became kind of like as a casino. And I'm not, at the moment, probably the biggest fan of crypto, given kind of like the players that are there, but I'm a big believer in technology. So I think that now is probably a good time for the founders in that space to develop new things, but with more focus on this trust, infrastructure, and technology versus the easy money. So given kind of like that we have a large number of cryptographers, people that have strong expertise in mathematics, this can be a good opportunity for us. And I think also what we really need is to have a strong exit in Web3, which I hope is going to happen this year. And that can really show everyone what's possible, but also in a clean and compliant way.
Keep us up to date about the exit.
Yeah, I'm just saying I would like to see.
Okay. Now, where do you see the potential for our region in terms of AI? Of course, I mean, there is a lot of discussion going on. I don't want to necessarily repeat what is being said on all the other media platforms at this point, but some of us would say, okay, when it comes to infrastructure and large language models, Europe has lost the game, yeah, and we maybe can do have some points when it comes to the application layer. Now, where do you stand here?
I actually think that application layer is the most difficult one because with investments of big players, it can really change quickly. There, of course, we believe that there is a difference that it's there is a much better opportunity for our founders to focus on the application layers where it's difficult for the big players to get in. So what I'm thinking about is for example, for OpenAI, for Google, it's difficult to go into verticals where data and privacy are issues.
Okay.
So we think that more things can be interesting for our founders that are going into these specific areas.
So health,
for example, that can be super interesting, and we are looking at that specifically. So that's kind of like in this application layer. We also think that kind of like if you think about the infrastructure stack, everything that requires a large capex is a no-go, right?
Okay.
However, there are elements of the stack, especially kind of like the data pipeline tools, the dev tools, where we can actually have good companies with the talent that we have. And at the end of the day, AI is the tool, and it's only good as the founders that are building it for the customers that are going to use it.
Especially AI, I think, because it is less, or it's going to be less so more about the technology. Obviously,
Exactly.
Technology is becoming through AI very accessible, but I think it's going to be more and more about the business knowledge and the domain knowledge that you have.
Of course, and because everyone now is using the large LLMs like OpenAIs, we are still in early innings of building the proprietary ones and how we can combine them, whether the value is going to be on the open source side. This is something that we're going to see. But I mean, kind of like we can talk about AI hype, but we still need to properly mention that OpenAI has 3.4 billion ARR at the moment, and now it's June 2024. So in 2 years, they came to this number, which is super impressive, and it's gonna stay. But we just need to see kind of like which elements we should focus on.
You mentioned also something else, the talent that we have. Now, we know that a huge part of the interesting startups and also inventions come from academia. And at the same time, academia has been, in my opinion, massively ignored by our governments in Central and Eastern Europe. And we are now, making again first steps in order to fuel this kind of like research. Are you looking into the universities? Is it, a founding team that you would be also attracted to? Someone who is actually very much deep dive, very research oriented? Yeah.
I think that would be amazing to have. I think they do have an advantage, especially in this AI world. For example, I'm a mentor in Nucleus, which is a deep tech venture accelerator as part of the FAIR, which is electrical engineering faculty in Zagreb. So I do think that innovations are going to come from them. I'm not sure that kind of like the PhDs and people that invent that are going to be the founders. We would like to help them with that, but if they're combined with more like business-minded people or more engineering-focused people, those combinations would be ideal. It's very difficult to manufacture them. They should happen in a more natural way. But I do agree with you that the next wave of innovation should come from that space.
Yeah.
And in addition to what you mentioned, kind of like the investments of our governments into the academia, there's also an element of kind of like how you license, what you do with the tech transfer, kind of like where's the IP sitting, whether that's part of the faculty, whether that's part of the government, if it's kind of like a public university, or that belongs to the actual person who developed it. And I think that's a big problem that we see. That's a big legal problem. There are multiple ways on how to solve it, but I think Europe generally has that problem. I mean, if you think about how Stanford started, they pretty much were very flexible and liberal in it, and you see the value that they built.
I think the region can be also very flexible, especially because many of those setups have not been regulated yet, or there are no rules.
True. But it also depends on the politics of the university at the time. So
yeah. Do you see the VC community a bit more involved in this process, in the tech transfer process, and how could venture capitalists be involved in that?
Well, we should be. We should be part of the conversation. I think that definitely we need to educate people. I think that a lot of people in the universities are more old school, so they are not really in touch of what's happening in 2024. But it requires kind of like a large time investment. But I support it. So we should be more. I'm probably not doing it. I haven't done it much. So it's a good advice from you.
Now, we talk a lot about, bringing the startup community to the next level, and we focus a lot around founders and their mindset and so on and so forth. But I've been always thinking, what about the VCs? I mean, they are part of this process as well. Is there something that maybe the VC community is lacking in their mindset or has been lacking in the first attempts? We know that there weren't any professional VCs when we started our startup ecosystems, 15 to 20 years ago. Many of them came from the consulting industry, from the investment banking industry, and so on and so forth. And they have gathered their own experience over time and maybe became better, but we didn't have many operators or entrepreneurs turned, VC. Exactly.
So we need to have more operators. That's one thing. Another thing is that our kind of like collective group needs to be connected to what's happening on a daily basis in the world, because our game is changing from day to day. So we cannot kind of like be in a very static environment. And I think that adaptability and flexibility is one of the key elements that a VC needs to have in order to be successful. I think that also we need to collaborate more among us. I think that at the end of the day, if we want to build unicorns, we cannot really work alone. So I'm a big proponent of 1 + 1 being 5. And it's a small environment. I mean, everyone knows everyone. If we're gonna trash each other, we're playing a village game, and that's not our goal. So I'm very direct on this point. I think that this is not something that is capturing value, and we need to focus on that. So build and capture the value. That's what we need to focus on.
I've been always surprised to see how collaborative founders can be to each other, but at the same time, when you bring VCs into the same room, they're first always like observing, and they don't want to share much and what they're planning to do, which was surprising.
But the thing is actually that we need to share, because they need to understand what we're expecting. And I always say VC is not the best solution for most of the startups, right?
Okay.
Because we are good in elements where you need what you're doing. You're building a big market. You're building a big product for the big market, and you need extra gasoline. So if you want to build a small regional local story, you don't need the VC money. And it's important that they understand our points and we understand what they want to accomplish. Because if they tell us we want to build a $10 billion story, and then they get the first offer and they want to buy an apartment on the seaside and BMW, well, probably someone was lying in early discussions. So I think this trust cannot last if we are not honest from the beginning.
Well, I think this also related to founders not necessarily being aware of what lies ahead of them. I think in the beginning you start off with a huge dose of optimism and you're excited, but I think it's hard to sustain this level of energy and enthusiasm throughout the whole journey.
Yeah, and that's why we are not the Shark Tank investors. We like to develop relationship with them before we invest. So we want to date for 6 to 9 months typically, because that's when you see how they react to those problems.
Do you have like dating rituals? So what do you do actually while you're dating a startup?
I'm cheap for dating. I only take my wife for expensive restaurants. Everything else, it's only coffee.
Okay.
But it's kind of like more discussing what's happening, understanding the business updates, understanding what's their plan for the next 3 months or some period of time, and then seeing kind of like compared to what you thought is going to happen or what you need to accomplish, where you are at the moment. And that tells us a lot. And then at the same time, we also want to be helpful for them and tell them, hey, how can we help you in all of this? We are not officially part of the company, but now you can actually see our value with no price. And then if it works, we build the chemistry, and then when it's the right time for the startup and the right time for us, we can just do the investment. We don't need to negotiate for a while.
Running a generalist fund can be challenging because you need to develop expertise in many different verticals.
Correct.
Now you mentioned several of them where traditionally our region has been strong. Now AI is also changing everything. And I think AI has a very specific, good to have a very specific effect, equalizing like the small players with the big ones, because all of a sudden we are all empowered by the AI itself. My question would be rather, how do you stay at the top of your game? Where do you learn about new things so that you can actually make these bets?
Yeah. So there are a couple of elements of what we do. So Tiho, for example, is a former CTO and three-time founder. So he studied AI in school. We also have 2 venture partners and LPs in the fund who are experts in the space. So we use them in a way when we want to do a deeper diligence on specific companies that we are looking in the sector.
Okay.
So it's really trying to be on the top of it in a smart way, whether using internal or external sources. But it's a lot of this adaptation and trying to learn and trying to speak with people and making mistakes in the process. We cannot be perfect. But we really need to be aware of what we know and what we don't know and what's the risk that we are willing to take in all of this process. So if I speak with the technical founders, I'm going to be super transparent and ask super dumb questions at the beginning. But as the time goes and I learn more about the subject, I want to be knowledgeable, to have more intelligent discussions and be able to understand the value of it, and whether we are a good fit and whether we can help them.
It's very similar to journalism, by the way. I think when we are also training people in our team how they can deal with these complex topics, I would always tell them there are no dumb questions. I mean, you should be able to talk to this person. They should be also able to explain that to you in simple terms, because if they can't, that's actually a great sign that someone is not understanding their own domain.
But the good thing that you're mentioning, one of the most successful venture capitalists is Mike Moritz from Sequoia, and he was formerly a journalist for a long time.
Yeah.
So that skill set is very relevant.
We have also Harry Stebbings, and I mean, he's also made like a great story. By the way, mentioning your sources of knowledge, are there like top tier VCs that you follow that maybe you would like to emulate to a certain extent?
Yeah. Well, I think each VC has kind of like his or her own particular style. I think that it's very difficult to emulate, and I don't think it's healthy. But I like to follow a lot of them on X, formerly Twitter.
Yeah.
Following, reading a lot of blogs. I like a lot what's happening, kind of like in everything in intersection of AI and SaaS. And then, very often, even the person that I admire a lot might say not the smartest things. But so I try to filter and see kind of like what creates value. But yeah. Spending a lot of time on it, definitely. And if you want names, I can name a few.
Yeah, please go. I mean, I think this could be helpful. Now, the common topic is always what do you watch on streaming platforms? What kind of podcasts you listen?
That's
and then the books is the next one.
That's the next question. So in terms of kind of like the blogs that or kind of like the VCs that I like to follow a lot, I think that Jason Lampkin on the SaaS side is building a lot of interesting content, especially kind of like how the company can scale. I like also on the AI side to read from Tom Tungus from Redpoint. He has great content. And then on X, a lot of people can say some really interesting things. So yeah, that's kind of like on that written side. On the podcast side, I like BG Square.
Yeah.
So Brad Gerstner from Altimeter and Bill Gurley, amazing guys, amazing discussions, great to follow. I listen a lot to Eric Thorenberg, who built Turpentine media platform and has specific podcasts that have different value propositions. The one with Samo Burja is super interesting on kind of like the macro and political end, talking a lot about what's happening with China, with the US, and on this macro global level, because that's also something that we as VCs need to follow a lot. Yeah, so I think that's on the podcast side.
Do you think that it is necessary for founders to be well informed about what is happening in the industry and in the world?
I don't think in 2024 they can survive without it. So they need to allocate specific time on this. I don't think there is a way that they can live in a bubble. And that's maybe some of the problems that we see. A lot of founders spend too much time in the vacuum developing the product that they think is going to work for the customers before really engaging with the founders. And after that, it's too late. It's an afterthought for them to think about the commercial end, instead of kind of like first getting all of the feedback and then really building the product. So I see that as a big problem.
I guess I'm also biased because I am part of the media industry, and that would, I do consume myself a lot of content, and sometimes I'm a bit disappointed how badly informed founders can be, especially because we are putting so much information out there.
Yes. And I think you're doing a great job. Netocratia is doing a good job, and a few other outlets. I think now Bloomberg is more active here. I think also Y Combinator has amazing content for the founders. I think that if they're not reading it, they're really missing a lot.
Yeah. Well, in the future, it won't be so much about reading. It will be probably about watching and, I don't know, conversing with
I'm still a big
ChatGPT.
fan of reading.
Yeah?
I like kind of like, there are also classics that have really internal messages that are going to always be relevant. I mean, they survive the test of time.
Yeah.
And then, of course, contemporary trends and opportunities, it's something that needs to be followed. So I like to have the mix of both.
I wonder which are going to be the signs that you would look for in the future so that you know you're doing a good job. Like, what are the symptoms of the good investor? How would you know?
If I stop being paranoid, I'm doing a bad thing.
Okay.
So I think that in what we are doing, we always need to be paranoid. We need to have chip on the shoulders and always be on the top of our game. So as soon as we get complacent, we're not going to survive. So I see that kind of like as one of the most important KPIs. And when that happens, that's going to happen sooner or later. But then I should retire and leave the spot for someone younger with more energy. So for me, kind of like the main KPIs, I mean, I need to be honest about it, right, is to return the money to the investors. And also the second KPI is how many success stories we build. But the third element, more personal, is when I see that I'm not adding value that I should, maybe that's not the right place for me.
I wonder what paranoid means to you, and I wonder if maybe that's like a necessary component that is counter reacting to the optimism of founders.
So, and kind of there is another element. I mean, we have in the core team, my partner Tiho and Marco, who is our investment principal and CFO.
Yeah.
So if you look at the spectrum, Tiho is the one who is the most positive. For him, the glass is always half full. For Marco, the glass is half empty all the time. He's a ex-finance person, ex-McKinsey, very strict to the numbers, and I'm in the middle.
Okay.
And on the other side, I'm always thinking kind of like, what's the best thing that can happen to our founders, and trying to have these difficult discussions. So, and that's really energizing for me, right? As soon as we finish those discussions, I feel better. So it can be draining for someone, but I get extra energy. And I think that, at the moment when that stops, it's probably not going to be good.
I guess founders...
So I would rather have those, sorry for that, I would just rather have this discussion when everything is going well, and just being paranoid is these discussions, what can go wrong, instead of it happening when things are difficult.
I think some founders react very defensively when you start asking them this kind of like risk management questions in the beginning.
And that's
they really
fine.
don't like them because they are a bit in this, optimistic bubble. And I think we can definitely develop a bit more compassion or understanding of each other's job, because your job is definitely the management of the risk, and their job is to believe and to stay really on course. But I'm also wondering here, because you are a good judge of character, to what extent the founders need to be paranoid?
Not at the level as we do,
Okay.
but still they need to have some healthy degree of it.
Okay.
So, and I think that if you have a founding team, I said that I prefer kind of like multiple founders. At least one of them needs to play a bit more on this role.
Okay.
But if no one is playing it, I think that they are in trouble.
Okay, good. Then I can...
Yeah.
Because I'm more the paranoid one, and Etienne is always like, the super optimistic. And
That's a good
we had like
combination.
clashes in the beginning, and then at some point we kind of like divided the work also accordingly. And we would say, okay, I do this, and then you do this. And we hope that combining our efforts is going to be qualitative a better result. Let's see how this goes.
And I think that's kind of like the chemistry that you want to have between founders, right? They need to be different, and they need to provide different value to the table. But at the end of the day, you need to work well in that and find the common ground.
Yeah, I guess that's the secret, respecting each other's differences or differentness or weirdness, whatever that would be.
Yeah.
And
respecting but not hiding.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that at the end, when you feel like you're not contributing, maybe it's, good to withdraw and give space to someone younger. What is the contribution that you want to make to the ecosystem?
I think that when I was starting my business career and I went to the US to study and then got my first job there, none of it would happen if I didn't have slightly older people that went before me and really advised me and mentored me and told me kind of like what's good, what's bad. And I'm super grateful for that. And I love this element of giving back to the community. So yes, there is a big monetary incentive which we have in order to do this, but there is also this other element that helping others is really, it's really helping me feel better. So I think that having that is also one of the reasons why I'm involved. Well, I want to continue doing this. I mean, this is the most fulfilling job I ever had, and I don't want to stop doing it. But in order to be successful, I need to be all in.
What does it mean to be successful, especially now on the path of venture capital? How do you see
Everyone
that?
has their different definition of success.
Yeah.
So I mentioned kind of like multiple elements. Returning money to the investors, building success stories. But I also want to have that element of building the institution and team behind me. So Tijo's and my goal is kind of like when we retire, we want fifth quarter to continue existing.
Yeah.
We want to have younger people taking our roles and pushing it to the next level. So everything that we did wrong, I want them to do right after us.
And if you're just as passionate about innovation as we are, hit subscribe for the Recursive podcast on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. We're everywhere.